This nostalgic story begins with astronaut and commander Jakob Brukaska traveling through the forests of Earth, but we soon see that it is a dream because he has just been awakened by the voice of the ship. With all his senses alert, Jakob takes his position and proceeds to talk communications with Peter, his companion in the distance and member of the Eurospace program base. In that place that day, the members are gathered by Commissioner Tuma, who, after explaining that about 189 days have passed since Jakob left on a solitary trip, we see that she establishes communications with the astronaut. After the protocol greetings, Jakob proceeds to explain that his mission is to reach the Chopra cloud of stardust, which was discovered 4 years ago, and that if all goes well, he is a week away from making contact to collect a sample and hopefully unravel the mysteries of the universe. That said, Jakob Datanoi agrees to answer questions from some civilians, including a little girl named Anna. She mentions to him that she read an article that Jakob is the loneliest man in the world, and now she wants to know if it doesn't make him sad to be so far away from Earth. Jakob responds by agreeing with her about his loneliness and remoteness, but claims that he knows he will be back soon, as he is halfway to his agreed return. He also has a lot of work and the opportunity to talk to people like her. Tuma interjects to mention that he also talks to his wife Lenka. Without much encouragement, Jakob agrees and explains that he talks to her through faster-than-light-speed communications technology. But in reality, deep down inside, Jakob knows he's just lying to keep his sponsors happy, who have so much power that in the interval of the broadcast we see commercials Jakob recorded with them, like anti-motion sickness pills. After this, things get more interesting, as a member of the program named Gregor observes the last message Lenka sent to Jakob, where she informs him of her decision to separate, just as he is traversing the universe. Returning to our protagonist, after relaxing his sphincter so that his bowel is expelled in his scene and changing the organic matter tanks, he decides to contact Peter to ask him to submit a request for authorization to repair the toilet. Peter does so, and then observes Jakob's tired face, noticing that he appears not to have slept. Jakob explains that his insomnia is due to the annoying noise from the toilet that prevents him from resting. That said, Jakob asks about Lenka, but Peter informs him that they haven't heard from her since last time. Speaking of her, we see that she is watching the Chopra cloud on the Earth's horizon. Jakob's day continues with him doing his physical exercises to stay in shape with the treadmill and avoid illness with a dry bath. At the operations center, Gregor takes Lenka's last message to Tuma, who, upon learning that Jakob is unable to sleep because of the pressure, decides to forbid him to see the message from his wife, who has left him. Peter warns him that Jakob is worried about his wife's absence, but Tuma maintains his decision, promising to talk to her. Thus, shortly after, we see that Jakob tries to talk to Lenka, who is carrying his daughter in her womb, but she decides not to answer. At the end of the day, and full of afflictions, as he cannot conceive sleep, Jakob ingests a remedy to force him to sleep. However, soon the decomposed system of capsules connected to the toilet wakes him up, and when he reaches the bathroom mirror and sees himself in it, Jakob discovers that he has a spider inside his skin, which runs along his face until it emerges through the cavity of his mouth. However, it is a nightmare that this time forces him to wake up for real. After exercising, he begins to practice with the sample collection simulation, but in doing so discovers that half of the ship's cameras are not working. Peter promises to report it as he does not understand the source of the problems. Jakob changes the subject and asks for someone to visit his house to give him news about Lenka. Moments later, when Jakob tries to communicate with her, the signal is cut off as something interferes with the call. Immediately, a male voice greets him and asks if he can come. Jakob demands to know who it is, and at this the voice apologizes and stops talking. Jakob tells Peter what happened, asking if he was hacked, but Peter reminds him that the system is secure. Still, he decides to reveal to him that there are indications that the Koreans are close to replicating their technology, and maybe, perhaps, it was their interference. But this is ruled out since the voice spoke in their language, so Peter promises to probe further. Finally, Peter informs him that Lenka went to visit her mother, and it will be a few days before she returns. Later, when Jakob awakens, upon checking the supply area, he discovers that several of the supplies were taken out of place. Suddenly, the toilet breaks down again, and as Jakob approaches to repair it, a giant spider appears before him. He follows his instincts and backs away and locks it in the bathroom. Right away, Jakob asks Peter to check the secret camera he knows they run from the control, but Peter reminds him that even that camera doesn't work. Peter notices something strange about Jakob, but Jakob ignores him to return to the bathroom and confirm that he is not crazy. Here, the spider explains to him that it was attracted by the spider. sounds from the tube of his stool vacuum cleaner. He also promises him that he has no reason to be afraid, but we see that Jacob decides to lock himself in the exclusion capsule with his suit, and from there he asks Peter to decontaminate the ship as a precaution. Peter warns him that his sensors did not detect anything, but at the insistence of Jacob, who prefers not to mention the speeder, we see that the protocol is authorized, and before starting Jacob must recite the sponsor's announcement. The decontamination begins by filling the ship with a cloud of chemicals, while Jacob recalls a field of flowers he visited with Lenka. When the process is over, Jacob observes that the spider is gone. Here, Peter suggests calling a psychologist to prevent his mental health from jeopardizing the mission, but Jacob promises that he is fit to continue. However, when he returns to the center of the ship, the spider welcomes him by claiming that although she senses his fear, she does not wish to harm him, and to prevent him from feeling guilt, she explains that the earth chemicals did not cause him any pain other than a sneeze. She also tells him that he does not need to be protected with his suit since he does not wish to turn back or contaminate it, promising him that it is as real and tangible as Jacob himself. He tries to touch her, but the spider forbids it, explaining that in her tribe, contact is a violation. With this, Jacob feels confident enough to get out of his suit and thus ask her what she is doing in this place. The spider responds by claiming that, like him, he is an explorer who was traveling through the confines of the solar system. When he felt attraction for humans and observing the Earth orbiting, he studied and learned about the history of humanity. However, he never came to understand them, and that is when he found Jacob's ship, as his loneliness filled him with intrigue, to the point of approaching to study him, and now he believes that maybe he can help him. Jacob refuses to believe that it is real, because he considers it a hallucination product of insomnia, so he returns to his bed to force himself to rest. Hours later, Jacob wakes up from a dream where Lenka was observing his capsule. He proceeds and gets up slowly while observing the everyday loneliness around him until the spider speaks to him again, showing him that she was the one causing the visions. Where Jacob recalls his days on Earth when he argued with Lenka as she was opposed to his interstellar travel. However, Jacob refuses to accept her help. At the same time on Earth, we see Lenka meeting with her friend Zdina, to whom she tells that she plans to move into a home for pregnant women. Zdina asks her not to make that decision as it is not the right time, and we see that, although Lenka understands, she does not back down. Meanwhile, when Jacob is about to watch his wife's recordings, he is interrupted by the spider in search of a conversation about Lenka. Although Jacob refuses to talk, he decides to leave when he discovers that the spider has entered the bathroom. Here the spider shows interest in a container with his picture on it, believing Jacob to be an honored being in his tribe. Jacob does not respond, so the spider tells him that apparently the cause of his loneliness is his imposed boundaries. Later, the spider joins him in the supply area, intrigued by the eggs, which to him represent shelled fetuses, but Jacob reveals to him that there are no eggs on the ship because of their rapid expiration. He then has him taste the chocolate. The spider compares them to the larvae of their land, which no longer exist, since their tribe was annihilated by a race called Grumpets, and that is why they decided to escape through the universe through time looking for solitude, but then they would find Jacob. At that moment, Peter calls our protagonist to inform him that the engineers are working to fix the problem in his communications with Lenka. Jacob thanks him, and then follows the spider to the window where he notices that the spider is also attracted to the cloud. Here, the spider reveals to him that when it was young, it was able to catch the cloud's grains with its tongue, and that such particles are so old that they probably came from the beginning of the universe. Jacob asks how old he is, or if his species is immortal, but the spider only expresses that everything, including the universe, must end. Being so close, Jacob continues to remember that night when Lenka proposed an oath where they would share their path no matter where he went. At this, the spider demands to know what purpose there is in making an oath that is easily broken in a life like his. Jacob is reluctant to let the spider see his memories, but the spider claims it only wants to help him. So, as they watch how that night he and Lenka went into a pool, the spider asks him why he longs for his wife when she is absent, and not when she is present, but Jacob can't find an answer. Then, at the next breakfast, the spider expresses to him that his memories make him feel depressed, but chocolate makes the experience less unpleasant. On Earth, Lenka tells Stina that despite her depression, she is confident that she will soon get better, and it is because of her condition that she does not want Jacob to see her. Stina asks her what she will tell her daughter when she asks about her father. Lenka says she will tell the truth, for when she married Jacob, she loved him even with her ambition, but now she knows it was a mistake. On the ship, Jacob finally accepts the spider as his mate, and so when he discovers that she never had a name, he decides to name her Janus, remembering how his father told him about the person who built the astronomical clock in Prague, which measured the movements of the stars. Jacob decides to name the spider Janos and planets, but his legacy ended when a king removed his eyes dies out of envy. However, Jacob now wonders if Hanus really existed. After that, Hanus becomes interested in the opera that Jacob put on to set the mood of the ship. The astronaut explains to him that the opera tells the story of a water nymph who falls in love with a mortal, but they cannot be together. Hanus understands that Jacob is projecting his own story onto the song and then goes on to recall when, after a costume party, he told her that he decided to be a cosmonaut. After telling him that his father also died, Lenka takes him to a hidden room to be alone. Hanus wants to know where all that love went, but Jacob asks her to stop torturing him with the memories. Later, Jacob is again awakened by a nightmare, this time by a pig on the ship. But once awake, he proceeds to recall how, in his childhood, he lived through those days when the world no longer trusted the communist regime. And it was on that day that his father slaughtered a pig in his presence and watched the animal bleed to death. The spider, who is not a spider in bed, enters the bathroom to demand Hanus to stop turning on the toilet, discovering that the spider usually sleeps hugging the suction tube. Hanus explains to him that he finds the vibration of the tube soothing and that at first it entered his thoughts, but he felt uncomfortable. For mankind always feels guilt, unlike his species, as they consider the universe to be as it should be. Then Jacob gives him permission to relax in the bath whenever he wants. Then Hanus is again struck by the sight of Jacob running. The astronaut explains to him that he must exercise to keep his bones from atrophying. Hanus understands that Jacob chose to leave the planet even though he knows the act is destructive to him, so he asks him about his father, which causes Jacob to remember that he was killed for being an informant for the Communist Party. The spider believes that Jacob seeks to atone for the sins of his father with his mission, so she advises him to focus on his own daughter to come. Meanwhile, Lenka is visited by Tuma, who reveals that she forbade her farewell message to reach Jacob herself and that she knows Jacob will be fine as she likes the solitude. However, Tuma informs her that Jacob went into depression because he misses his wife. Still, Lenka tells her that he would not have left the earth then. Tuma reveals to her that he sent men to disconnect the telecommunicator at her house, asking her to wait for Jacob to return. Lenka refuses, so Tuma leaves, reminding her that her presence on the other side is what allows Jacob to resist the silence of the universe. On the ship, Jacob finishes practicing with the sample collection simulation with only 45 hours left before reaching the cloud. This done in the middle of his work, Jacob hears Lenka's voice again. At first he thinks it is the spider, but soon discovers that the conversation he had with her months ago is being replayed. Here he observes how that day, Lenka was trying to talk to him, but Jacob refused to open his heart to her. Lenka then says she wants to understand what her husband really wants, as he is always in the dichotomy of wanting to get back with her, but then always swears he longs to know the end of the universe. The conversation ends with Jacob's voice from the past, practically sending Lenka to hell for questioning his dreams. Here, while trying to turn off the player, Jacob notices that a cloud grain has infiltrated the ship, so he immediately moves to encapsulate it, but in doing so discovers that the grain is intangible as it passes through all matter in front of it. Out of options, Jacob decides to suck up the grain with the toilet pipe, which seems to work. However, upon searching through his waste, he discovers that the grain is gone, as is all communication with Earth. In the midst of this, Jacob notices that more particles have just entered his ship to continue on their way to the cloud. Seeing that they are too close, Jacob asks Hanus what will happen to him when they arrive, and the spider promises him that he has no reason to fear, for the cloud or the principle is only a repository that he cannot describe in the words of humanity. Meanwhile, on Earth, as if in parallel, Lenka finds a spider on her curtain that catches her attention. Faced with this, we see that Lenka finally decides to move home to get pregnant. Hanus continues to ask questions, and this time he wants to know why the birth of his daughter is causing Lenka so much stress. Jacob claims that, like him, she is just scared. At that moment, seeing her treadmill turn on by itself, Jacob starts to remember how in the past Lenka was already pregnant but had a miscarriage. And although she asked him to be by her side, Jacob always chose his work first, paying more attention to his breakfast than to his wife's depression after her loss. Seeing that Jacob is again absent before the possible birth of his daughter, Hanus asks him if the pain he is experiencing causes him pleasure. Later, although our protagonist tries to repair communications, the spider decides to continue with his memories, and thus observes how when he finally returned home, Jacob promised him that he would be by his side. But now Hanus reveals to him that Lenka could sense the falsity of his words, and so he says he does not understand why Jacob did not see that one day Lenka would stop believing him. After working tirelessly, Jacob manages to re-establish communications with Peter, but before he reports, Hanus interrupts the call to continue looking into his past, so Jakub returns to that field of flowers where he told Lenka about his interstellar trip, which would last a year, promising that it would be the last time. but Lenka is reluctant to believe him because he always says the same thing, so he asks if she has thought about the price in their relationship that the distance will take. Hanus reproaches her for not having tried to understand Lenka's feelings and now knows that it is impossible to establish a bond with someone like him who only wants to see himself and who only wants to connect when it suits him, while at first he thought that humanity was just like him. Now thanks to Lenka he understands that Jaku's loneliness is self-inflicted, and so Hanus decides to abandon him as Jaku is no longer of interest to him. Hearing this, Jaku asks him to stay and tries to touch him, which provokes Hanus to subdue him with his paws while expressing that he has no salvation and reminding him that he cannot touch him and then leave. Jaku tries to reach him but only finds his old solitude and the silence of the universe. Later, as Jakob wanders into zero gravity, he decides to reminisce on his own about that costume night where he passionately kissed his wife and sheds his tears as he replayed the recordings. When he pulls himself together and gets back in touch with Peter to report that everything is going according to plan despite the communications interruption, before making any further reports, Jakob orders Peter to go home to see Lenka. Without options, Peter obeys, and so we see that he shows up at that home, and as he knows that visits are not normal having her in front of him, the first thing he does is to tell her that Jakob is alive. Then Peter explains to her that he does not want to intervene in their relationship, but for the safety of the mission, he must inform her that Jakob only wants her to listen to him, and to do so, he gives her a satellite phone. So, once alone, Jakob proceeds to tell her that now he understands everything, and that he can't imagine anything worse than that day when he told her that he wanted to see beyond Jupiter, because he only wants to return home, that now he can't understand why he always left her alone. When Jakob tells her that he does not want to see beyond Jupiter, Peter tells her that he does not want to see beyond Jupiter, when all he ever really cared about was her. As he now understands that she went out of her way to know him, he asks her forgiveness for not having done the same, because even though she was in front of him, he could never truly see her, and now he knows that he never deserved to have her by his side, and that if he could go back to the past, he would only live by her side and never break that promise. With that said, we see that Jakob feels liberated, and moments later, as his ship enters the ends of the cloud, he continues to reminisce about his youth, but in his memories, he discovers that Hanus is still watching him. The spider mentions to him that he was able to see how Jakob exculpated his sins and therefore advises him to rest. Thus we see that upon awakening, Jakob sees Hanus again, and while the astronaut asks him not to leave him again, Hanus reveals to him that he cannot let him experience the beginning of everything alone, and that he has discovered that even a being like him does not wish to be alone. In the midst of this, Jakob notices that Hanus looks distressed for as he approaches. The speeder reveals to him that before he left his world too, well, he was infected by the Grumpets. Seeing that Jakob is afraid of the truth like every human being, Hanus says he understands why dreams and nightmares are essential. Our protagonist reproaches her for never telling him about his situation, but the spider reminds her that she never asked him. Thus, Jakob manages to convince Hanus to allow them to embrace. Meanwhile, Lenka meets another woman from the household. She tells her about the cloud, asking if she imagines being in space without gravity, and assures them that she would rather be on Earth than chasing space dust. After getting enough rest, Hanus wakes Jakob up with breakfast. This done, we see that Jakob prepares to enter the cloud. He thus establishes communications with Peter and control on Earth, who informs him that his latest pre-recording is being broadcast live for the whole world because they don't have the ship's cameras up and running yet. So, Lenka watches as Jakob reports his impending cloud sighting, and his thanks to the entire team, including her for her support. These words make Lenka decide to leave the home of pregnant. On his side, once inside the cloud, Jakob deploys the ship's hydraulic arms to collect the samples. But in the middle of this, he observes that Hanus's body has begun to sprout its parasites, which forces him to move away. The ship's inconsistencies make Peter order him to abort, but Jakob leaves the mission aside to go after Hanus, and when he discovers that the spider left the ship, asking him not to fear for him, he decides to steal a decontaminant gas capsule, and after putting on the suit, we see that he leaves the ship in search of his friend. But his calculations when maneuvering with the gas fail, causing him to push Hanus as he crashes into his ship, and at the same time causes him to unhook from the lock that had him tied to the structure. However, after spinning senselessly, he ends up reaching Hanus, who acknowledges his heroic efforts, and although he makes it clear that soon his parasites will consume his flesh, he assures him that he still has time before he dies. Here, as Jakob watches his ship get lost inside the cloud, he mentions to her that this reminds her of when she almost drowned in her childhood. But he was saved by his father, and so now absolves him of his sins, just as he forgives himself for his own. Having said this, Jakob accepts to die there, but Hanus tells him that it is not yet the end, as he proceeds to drag him towards the center of the cloud, where Jakob finds the confluence and convergence of everything, of the beginning and the end, as Hanus explains to him that in that place all the vibrations of all times are found at the same time. his past, his future, he, Hanus, Lenka, his father, his promises and his atonements. For everything there is permanent and at the same time ephemeral, for that is the truth of the universe. As he goes deeper, Jacob's body begins to be sucked in at one point to be expelled at another, where peace reigns. Jacob decides to show her the day he met Lenka and tells her that from that moment he knew he wanted to experience good things with her, and now he knows that if only he had seen her differently. That said, Jacob understands that the time has come to say goodbye, and even Hanus accepts that he is afraid, but leaves in peace knowing that his friend no longer suffers. As a farewell, Jacob hands him the chocolate and his provisions. As he consumes it, seeing the approaching light, Hanus mentions that this may not be the end of Jacob, as we see the cloud open up, leaving a free path to escape. So Hanus says goodbye, advising him to learn to listen to silence, and with that said, the parasites emerge in their entirety to devour him completely. In the meantime, Lenka arrives in that field where the flowers bloom in spring. He decides to stay there until nightfall, and it is here that he observes one of the cloud particles leaving the earth. Meanwhile, we see that again, in complete solitude, Jacob falls asleep and in his dreams returns to a world where he is reunited with Lenka, and at the same time we see that from the earth his wife can feel his presence. Jacob's dream is interrupted when he sees that a Korean ship that left after its mission has just arrived. At dawn, Lenka receives a call, and when she answers it, it is Jacob, who expresses that if he could return to the past with what he now has, he would be able to return to the past. He knows he would never have left, and we see that Lenka is more open to accept him again, thus ending Spaceman. The truth? A very introspective film. Personally, I like it a lot. It reminded me of the story of Gravity, a story I did some time ago in the channel, but I can make it remastered with another tint. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything.